I thought the hardest part of getting older would be my knees, the mornings when they crackle like old wood, the careful way I step off curbs now, the little pauses I take before standing up, pretending I'm just admiring the view. But I was wrong. The hardest part isn't the body, it's realizing how easily people start to assume things about you, especially family. A week before my son's wedding, I was sitting at my kitchen table, sorting through place cards I'd offered to help organize. It felt nice to be included, even in a small way. Weddings have a way of making mothers feel both needed and invisible at the same time. I didn't mind. I told myself I was just happy to be there. Then my phone buzzed. It was a group message, one I wasn't meant to see, sent accidentally by my sister-in-law and quickly deleted. But not quickly enough. I won't repeat it word for word. What matters is what it assumed, that I'd keep an eye on the kids, that I'd be good with them, that I wouldn't mind missing the ceremony details. 15 children, all under the age of 7. I stared at the screen, waiting for a follow-up message explaining the misunderstanding. Something like, of course, Mom will be seated up front, or we're just kidding. Nothing came. I thought about my son, how he used to beg me to sit and watch him blow out his birthday candles, how he'd scan the crowd at school plays until he found my face. I wondered when I'd gone from mother of the groom to free labor with a smile. I didn't respond right away. That night, as I folded laundry, I kept hearing my late husband's voice in my head. You teach people how to treat you, he used to say. I hadn't listened then. I'd been too busy keeping the peace. The next morning, I called my son. Just checking in, I said lightly. What am I doing during the ceremony? There was a pause, a short one, but long enough. Well, he said carefully, we figured you'd be most comfortable helping out with the kids. You're so good with them. So good with them. I thanked him and hung up. For a few minutes, I sat very still. Then I stood up, opened my closet, and pulled out the suitcase I hadn't used in years. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply understood something I should have learned long ago. If I showed up as expected, I would disappear completely. And this time, I wasn't willing to vanish quietly. I didn't make any decisions that day, at least not the kind that look like decisions from the outside. I went about my routine as usual, watered the plants, answered a few polite messages, folded the same laundry I'd already folded once. But inside, something had shifted. A door I hadn't known was there had opened, and I could feel a draft coming through. That afternoon, I drove to the grocery store and found myself standing in the bakery aisle longer than necessary, watching a young couple argue softly over cake flavors, vanilla or chocolate. Simple problems. I smiled to myself, then felt a pinch of sadness I hadn't expected. I thought about my own wedding. It wasn't fancy. We didn't have a planner or a seating chart. What we had was hope, and my mother, sitting proudly in the front row, wearing a dress she'd saved for months to buy. No one asked her to help. No one told her to manage children or clear plates. She was a guest, an honored one. I wondered what she would think if she could see me now. That evening, my phone buzzed again. Another message in the family group chat, this one very carefully written, very polite. Just a reminder that the kids' table will be set up near the back patio. Let us know if you need anything for them. Need anything. As if this were my assignment. I typed a response, erased it, typed again. Each version sounded too sharp or too small. I set the phone down and walked outside instead. The air was cool, the kind that makes you breathe deeper without meaning to. I sat on the porch steps and watched the sky change color. I realized then how often I'd accepted things simply because no one had said them out loud. How many times I'd filled roles that were offered quietly, wrapped in compliments, so I wouldn't feel used. You're so good with kids. You don't mind, do you? It's just easier this way. Easier for whom? The next morning, I met my friend Ruth for coffee. We'd known each other since our children were small, back when our biggest worries were scraped knees and missing lunchboxes. She looked at me over the rim of her cup and said, "You're quiet today." I told her everything. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she leaned back and shook her head. "They didn't ask you," she said. "They assigned you." That word sat heavy between us. "I don't want to ruin his wedding," I said quickly, the old reflex rising up. Ruth reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You won't ruin anything by refusing to disappear." On the drive home, her words followed me like a steady drumbeat. Refusing to disappear. That night, I opened the suitcase again. This time, I didn't just look at it. I began to pack slowly, thoughtfully. Comfortable shoes. A book I'd been saving. The blue dress I always felt good in. By the time I zipped it closed, my hands were calm. I still hadn't told anyone my plan, but for the first time since that message arrived, I slept through the night. And somewhere in my dreams, I was no longer standing at the edge of the room, watching life happen without me. The days leading up to the wedding moved faster after that. Every message in the family chat felt louder now, each one another reminder of the role I was expected to play. Seating arrangements were finalized. Timelines were shared. Little smiling emojis followed instructions that weren't really requests at all. I stayed quiet, not because I didn't care, but because I was finally listening. 2 days before the wedding, my son called. "Mom," he said, trying to sound cheerful, "can you come a little early on Saturday? Just to help things run smoothly." I closed my eyes for a moment. "How early?" I asked. "Well," he hesitated, "before the ceremony. The kids might need settling. And maybe you could keep them busy during the vows." There it was, spoken plainly at last. I pictured the ceremony space, the rows of chairs, the soft music, the moment I'd imagined for years. Watching my son step forward, heart full, knowing I'd had a hand in the man he'd become. And then I pictured myself outside, counting juice boxes. "I'll let you know," I said quietly. He sounded relieved. "Great. I knew I could count on you." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned itself out, leaving something steadier behind. Grief, not the loud kind, the quiet kind that comes when you realize a story you've been telling yourself, "I'll always be included," was never quite true. That afternoon, I pulled out an old envelope from the back of a drawer. Inside were travel brochures I'd collected years ago, places I'd meant to see someday. One in particular caught my eye, a small coastal town, calm and unassuming, with a long boardwalk and early morning light. I dialed the number on the brochure. "Yes," I said when the woman answered. "I'd like to make a reservation." When I hung up, my hands trembled not with fear, but with something like excitement. I hadn't planned a trip just for myself in decades. That evening, I received a message from my future daughter-in-law. It was friendly, warm on the surface. "We're so grateful you'll be there to help with the kids. It means the world to us." I read it twice. Then, for the first time, I replied, "I won't be able to help with childcare on Saturday. I've made other plans." 3 dots appeared almost immediately, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Oh, is everything okay?" I stared at the question. Everything was more than okay. It was finally honest. "Yes," I wrote back. "Everything is fine." I set the phone down and went to bed early, the suitcase waiting by the door. I didn't know yet how they would react. I didn't know what would happen when they realized I meant it. But I did know one thing. For the first time in a very long while, my plans belonged to me. And that changed how I slept, how I breathed, and how I walked into the next day. The morning of the wedding arrived more quietly than I expected. No alarms, no rushing footsteps, no frantic phone calls, at least, not at first. I woke before sunrise, the room still wrapped in that soft gray light that makes everything feel undecided. For a moment, I lay there wondering if I'd change my mind. Old habits die hard. For years, I'd trained myself to step in when needed, to smooth things over before anyone felt uncomfortable. But then I remembered the messages, the assumptions, the way no one had actually asked me. I got up and dressed slowly, not in the outfit I'd bought for the ceremony, but in the simple clothes I'd packed for myself. Comfortable, familiar, honest. I brewed coffee and drank it at the table, listening to the quiet hum of the house. It felt like a pause the world had granted me, one last chance to decide who I was going to be that day. At 7:04 a.m., my phone rang. My son. "Mom," he said the moment I answered, already tense. "Where are you?" I looked out the window at the pale sky. "Getting ready." "For what?" he asked. "People are already bringing their kids. We need you here early." There it was again. Not concern, not curiosity, need. I won't be there, I said calmly. What do you mean you won't be there? His voice rose. This is my wedding. I know, I replied, and I hope it's beautiful. He exhaled sharply. You said you had other plans, but I didn't think you meant today. I smiled sadly. Today was the only day it could be. Silence stretched between us, heavy and unfamiliar. So, you're just leaving us to deal with this? He asked. I closed my eyes. I'm letting you handle what you decided without me. He didn't say goodbye. The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand, waiting for the familiar guilt to rush in. It didn't. What I felt instead was steadiness, the kind that comes when you finally stop arguing with yourself. I locked the door, placed my suitcase in the trunk, and drove away just as the sun began to rise. The roads were nearly empty, the world still waking up. I turned on the radio and let an old song fill the car, one that reminded me of dancing barefoot in the kitchen years ago, when joy didn't need permission. By mid-morning, I stopped at a small diner off the highway. The waitress poured my coffee and asked where I was headed. Somewhere I've been putting off, I said. She smiled, as if that made perfect sense. As I pulled back onto the road, my phone buzzed again, this time with a flurry of missed calls and messages. I didn't read them. Not yet. For once, I wasn't running late for someone else's expectations. I was right on time for my own. I set the phone down, turned toward the water, and smiled not out of spite, but out of something deeper. Peace. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for your family is to stop rescuing them from their own assumptions. By the time the afternoon sun settled higher in the sky, the wedding was well underway without me. I imagined it clearly because I knew my family. The hurried whispers, the confused glances, the sudden realization that someone had to watch the children. 15 little bodies, fueled by sugar and excitement, darting between tables and tugging at expensive dresses. I pictured my daughter-in-law's smile tightening, my son rubbing the back of his neck the way he does when plans unravel. And for the first time, I didn't feel responsible for fixing it. I had checked into a small lakeside in an hour earlier. Nothing fancy. White curtains, a creaky wooden floor, and a window that opened right onto the water. I set my suitcase down and stood there breathing in the smell of pine and sunlight. It felt like stepping into a memory I hadn't lived yet. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally looked at my phone. Dozens of messages, some frantic, some sharp, a few confused. One from my son read, "Mom, this is really bad timing." Another, "We didn't mean for it to sound like that." And then one, sent much later, quieter somehow even through text, "Can we talk?" I didn't reply right away. Instead, I walked down to the water. The lake shimmered, small waves lapping at the dock like they were whispering secrets to each other. I slipped off my shoes and let my feet touch the cool boards. My hands trembled not from fear, but from release. I thought about all the times I'd swallowed discomfort because it's easier this way. All the birthdays I'd worked through, the holidays where I'd washed dishes alone while laughter echoed in another room. I told myself it didn't matter, that love meant sacrifice. But love, I was realizing, also means honesty. Later that afternoon, my phone rang again. This time I answered. "Mom," my son said, his voice lower now. "Tired. We had to hire someone last minute." "I'm glad you figured it out," I said gently. There was a pause. I didn't know they planned it like that. I swear, I believed him mostly. But belief didn't erase the pattern. "I don't need you to explain," I said. "I need you to understand why I left." He didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice cracked just a little. "I didn't think you'd actually choose yourself." I closed my eyes, tears pricking. Neither did I that night. While the wedding lights flickered somewhere miles away, I sat by the lake with a warm cup of tea. Fireflies blinked in and out of the dark, like small reminders that even brief light matters. I wasn't punishing anyone. I wasn't being dramatic. I was simply done shrinking. And though I didn't know it yet, the choice I made that day was already changing the way my family would see me forever. Because when I finally returned home, I wouldn't be coming back as their backup plan. I'd be coming back as myself. I slept better that night than I had in years. Not the deep, dreamless sleep of exhaustion, but the kind that comes when your shoulders finally drop, when your body realizes it doesn't have to stay on guard. Morning arrived softly, sunlight stretching across the wooden floor like it was afraid to wake me too fast. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I remembered. I remembered the unanswered expectations, the wedding I didn't attend, the version of myself I had left behind at that church, quiet, agreeable, always available. I made coffee in the little kitchenette and carried the mug outside. The lake was still, almost reverent, as if it knew something important had happened here. I sat on the dock wrapped in a cardigan and thought about my son as a boy, how he used to run to me with scraped knees, trusting I'd fix everything. Somewhere along the way, that trust had quietly turned into assumption. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was my daughter-in-law. I stared at her name longer than I meant to. We had always been polite, careful, smiling conversations that never went too deep. I tapped answer before I could talk myself out of it. "Hello," I said. Her voice was hesitant. "I didn't realize you'd left town." "I did," I replied calmly. Another pause. Then, quieter, "I owe you an apology." That surprised me. She went on, words tumbling out unevenly. "When someone suggested you could watch the kids, it sounded practical. You're so good with children. And I guess I didn't stop to think how it would feel to be assigned that role. Assigned." The word landed heavy, but honest. "I should have asked," she said, "not assumed." I exhaled slowly. Yes, I said, you should have. There it was. No shouting, no bitterness, just truth. She didn't argue. I didn't mean to make you feel invisible. I know, I said, surprised to find I meant it. But intentions don't erase impact. When we hung up, I felt something loosen inside me, not forgiveness exactly, but possibility. That afternoon, I took myself to lunch. A real lunch, white tablecloth, soup served hot, no children tugging at my sleeve, no one asking me to cut grapes or fetch juice boxes. I listened to the hum of other conversations, watched couples clink glasses, and realized how long it had been since I'd simply existed in a room without being needed. Needed is a tricky word. It can sound like love. It can feel like purpose. But sometimes it's just a cage dressed up nicely. Later, my son texted again. The ceremony's over. I wish you'd been there. I typed, deleted, then finally wrote, I wish things had been different. He replied almost instantly, they will be, if you let them. That night, lying in that quiet room, I thought about coming home, not rushing back, not smoothing things over, but returning on my own terms. I wasn't done yet, not with this break, and not with the conversation my absence had started. Because sometimes the loudest message a mother can send is choosing not to show up. Coming home felt stranger than leaving. I pulled into my driveway 2 days later, the house looking exactly the same, white porch railings, the wind chime that always sang a half note too sharp, the welcome mat my son bought me years ago that still read home, sweet home, everything familiar. And yet, I stepped inside like a guest. The silence was different now, not lonely, intentional. I set my bag down and didn't rush to unpack. Instead, I walked from room to room, noticing the little sacrifices I'd folded into my life without realizing it. The guest room turned storage. The kitchen calendar filled with everyone else's dates. The armchair I always gave up when company came, choosing the harder seat because they'd be more comfortable. I sat in that armchair now. It wasn't uncomfortable at all. That evening, my son came by alone. No announcement, no entourage. Just him, standing on the porch with his hands shoved in his pockets like he used to when he was nervous as a teenager. Hi, Mom, he said softly. Hi, I answered, and waited. He didn't launch into explanations. He didn't defend himself. That alone told me something had shifted. I messed up, he said finally. I didn't mean to, but I did. I nodded. You did, he swallowed. When we were planning the wedding, everything felt chaotic. People kept suggesting things, and instead of thinking, I just let it happen. I didn't stop to imagine how it would feel to be you. That word again, imagine. I didn't need a babysitter, he continued. I needed my mother. The honesty in his voice cracked something open in my chest. I gestured to the chair across from me, and he sat. I love you, I said, but love doesn't mean automatic access to my time and energy. I've spent my whole life giving those away freely. I'm not angry, but I'm done being assumed. He nodded, eyes damp. I don't want you to disappear from my life. I'm not disappearing, I said gently. I'm stepping into it. We sat there a long while, no rush, no fixing, just two people learning a new way to be related. Before he left, he asked, "Will you come to dinner next Sunday?" I smiled. "I will, as a guest." He laughed, a small, relieved sound. "Deal." After he left, I stood by the window and watched his car pull away. I felt older than I had a week ago, and somehow lighter. That night, I wrote something in a notebook I'd kept blank for years. Being kind should never require being small. I didn't know yet how this new chapter would look. Boundaries are awkward at first. They wobble. They get tested. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of that, because respect, I was learning, isn't something you demand loudly. It's something you teach, sometimes by walking away, and sometimes by finally sitting down in your own chair. The weeks after the wedding taught me something I wish I'd learned sooner. Change doesn't arrive with fireworks. It comes quietly, like new light in a familiar room. Sunday dinner did happen. My son showed up with his wife this time, both of them carrying a casserole they'd made themselves. No children trailing behind them, no assumptions hanging in the air. Just a knock, a pause, and my daughter-in-law standing there with a careful smile. "Thank you for having us," she said. "Not we're here, not what's for dinner. Thank you." We sat around the table like people relearning a dance, polite, a little stiff, honest in small ways. She asked about my trip. I told her about the woman from Arizona and the card game, and how freeing it felt to be anonymous for once. She listened, really listened, without interrupting. Halfway through the meal, she surprised me. "I owe you an apology," she said, setting her fork down. "I didn't see you as a guest at our wedding. I saw you as help, and that wasn't fair." The room went very still. I studied her face. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't rehearsed. She looked uncomfortable in the way people do when they finally tell the truth. "I accepted what was offered," I said carefully, "but I also allowed myself to be taken for granted. That part is on me." She nodded. "I don't want that to be how we start our family." Neither did I. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We simply agreed to do better. And sometimes that's the strongest kind of peace. After dinner, when they left, I didn't feel drained. I felt steady. Days turned into weeks. My phone rang less, but when it did, the calls felt different. Invitations instead of expectations. Questions instead of instructions. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped by and said, "You seem lighter these days." I laughed. I finally put myself down on my own to-do list. I started doing small, selfish things. Morning walks that went longer than necessary. Joining a book club, even though I hate committing to schedules. Saying, "Let me think about it," instead of an automatic yes. And something else happened, something I didn't expect. People adjusted. The world didn't fall apart because I stopped holding it up. Children were watched. Meals were cooked. Plans were made without me being the invisible glue. That realization stung a little, but it also healed something deep. One evening, as I folded laundry, my son called again. "Mom," he said, "we're thinking about hosting Thanksgiving this year, but only if you actually want to come. No duties, no roles." I looked around my quiet house at the life I'd finally rearranged to fit myself. "I'd like that," I said, "as long as I get to leave early if I want." He laughed. "Deal." After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed and thought about how close I'd come to attending that wedding as a ghost, present, useful, and unseen. Instead, I had chosen absence, and absence had taught them my value. Still, one question lingered in my heart, soft but persistent. Had I changed too late, or had I arrived at myself exactly on time? That answer would come soon, in a way none of us expected. Some lessons don't announce themselves when they arrive. They wait until life gets quiet enough for you to hear them breathe. Thanksgiving came and went just as my son promised. I arrived when I wanted, left when my back started to ache, and no one chased me with a list of chores or a crying child. I was handed a plate, a glass of wine, and most surprisingly, a seat at the center of the table. Not because I demanded it, because it was offered. Later that night, as dishes were cleared and laughter softened into small talk, my daughter-in-law sat beside me on the couch. The television was on mute, some old holiday movie flickering in the background. "I watched the wedding video again," she said quietly. "There's a moment where everyone's dancing, and you're not there." I didn't answer right away. "I realized something," she continued. "The room looked full, but it felt incomplete." That was the first time anyone had ever said that about my absence. She swallowed, then added, "I don't want my children growing up thinking love is something women give until there's nothing left." My throat tightened. I reached for her hand, not as a gesture of forgiveness, but of understanding. "That belief gets passed down quietly," I said, "like a family recipe no one questions." She squeezed my hand. "I want to break it." And in that moment, I knew the wedding hadn't been the turning point. That conversation was. Driving home later, the road dark and familiar, I thought about all the years I'd measured my worth by how needed I was, how often I mistook exhaustion for love, how easily I disappeared behind other people's milestones. I had spent decades teaching my family how to treat me by never asking for more. That day, I didn't babysit 15 children. I didn't sit in the back. I didn't make myself smaller so others could feel bigger. And the world didn't punish me for it. It adjusted. Now, when people ask why I didn't attend my own son's wedding, I don't explain. I simply smile and say, because sometimes love requires stepping away so it can learn to stand. If there's one thing I want you to carry with you from my story, it's this: you are not selfish for choosing yourself. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. And you are never too old to rewrite the role you've been playing your whole life. Love should never come at the cost of your dignity. And if it does, it isn't love asking, it's habit. Thank you for being here and listening. If this story touched you, please tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from or sharing a small part of your own story.